but thank
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's Development Management Committee meeting. I'd like to welcome all the members of the public and councillors to this evening. Apologies for absence and substitutions. We have...
There's apologies for absence from Councillor Mike Garnett and Councillor Simon Carter is acting as substitute, and there's also apologies from Councillor Maggie Holfield.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Yes.
Item number 7 is Ward Councillor for Old Harlow.
Okay. Next,
For a gate, and with near but not opposite the development.
Thank you.
Non-pecuniary interest, I'm a ward councillor for the Tobruk area, which is the Northbrooks House scheme.
And likewise, non-pecuniary in item 9, as I'm a Tobruk councillor as well. Okay. Councillor
It's a non-pecuniary interest.
Non-pecuniary, thank you.
I have a pecuniary interest in that the third item in Northbrooks is a client of mine in another site, which requires me to withdraw from the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Hart. Okay, moving down the agenda. Minutes which appear pages 3 to 5 of your agenda papers. Are they agreed? Any matters arising? No? Thank you. Thank you. Item 5, written questions, there are none. Item 6, the procedure which we use tonight for the consideration of planning applications. We'll start with the planning officer making a presentation of their report, followed by comments which have been invited from members of the public who have registered with the government support section at least 24 hours in advance. A maximum of 3 for an application, a maximum of 3 against an application, and each speaker is limited to a maximum of 3 minutes. Comments will then be invited from the applicant stroke agent, again for a maximum of 3 minutes, and again they would have needed to give at least 24 hours notice to the government support section of their intention to speak. At that point, councillors will take questions and clarifications from officers. Officers will respond to those questions, and then councillors will debate and come to a decision on each of the applications. So, moving to pages 6 to 35 of your agenda, Gilden Park, Gilden Way, item 7. Mark, if you could make a presentation.
This application seeks planning permission for a total of 592 dwellings and associated development on land north of Gilden Way. The dwellings will be provided within the red line shown on this slide. The land in blue is the extent of the original application site. Outline planning permission was granted for up to 1,100 dwellings within this site. However, through the reserve matters process, detailed permission was eventually granted for 911 dwellings. The approved plans allow for 449 dwellings to be built within the red line. This application therefore seeks an additional 143 units within that area. So I'm not sure how clear it is up there for you, but it's this area here. The part of the approved development which is within the current application site is shown here. The proposed scheme would replace this layout. The application now before members must be considered in the context of the approved development, and it's an important material consideration that as a result of this proposal there will be a site-wide total of 1,054 dwellings, which is under the approved 1,100 limit. The majority of issues that would arise from the proposed developments, such as whether the development is acceptable in principle and the impacts on the highway, have already been accepted on the basis of more dwellings being built than is now proposed. In essence, this application should be considered as an uplift to the approved scheme, and therefore the main considerations are the impacts arising from the layout and the design of the new house types. Many of the objections raised both for this application and historically, such as the loss of visual amenity or loss of green space, for example, should not now be reassessed. The majority of the layout is the same as approved in general. you can also see that there is no development outside the approved development area. Only the layout of the residential development is proposed to change, and there are no alterations to open space provision either inside or outside the red line. The area to the south of the red line is a green space called the Linear Park, which is across here. This slide and the next one show that the most obvious change to the scheme is an increase in the number of flats which would face onto the Linear Park. An increase in the number of flats here is supported, as the flats would provide a strong edge to the park and improve consistency and rhythm along the frontage. So this is the frontage as it's now proposed, and there you can see the frontage as it's been approved. The proposed flats would be 3 stories, which is the same as approved, and the nearest property outside of Gilden Park will be in excess of 50 metres away. So it's not considered there'd be amenity impact. The other streets within the development will be very similar to the approved scheme. For example, this slide shows the design of the properties along the part of the northern edge of the development, and this shows the same edge as it's been approved. The proposal has been assessed against the terms of the outline permissions, such as approved heights or, as we've shown here, the approved densities, and are in conformity with those approved terms. It's not considered that the site can be considered overdevelopment in this context. The approved scheme was subject to a number of legal agreements. The majority of the obligations within them, such as the highway works and open space, were provided on the basis of up to 1,200 homes being provided, as this was the amount of homes which was originally proposed for the outline planning application. And as such, there's no requirement for them to be uplifted now. Only affordable housing and education, healthcare and library contributions need to be uplifted in order to make the development acceptable now, and this can be secured through a new legal agreement to vary the existing agreements. It's considered that in the context of the wider development, the proposed changes to the scheme are relatively small and would result in an improved frontage to the Linear Park and would provide uplifted contributions, which would include another 43 affordable homes. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the applicant entering into an appropriate legal agreement and the conditions which are set out at pages 22 to 32 of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. There are 4 speakers on this item, so if I could ask Mr. Gray to come forward, please. Is Mr. Gray not here? No? Okay, in that case, could I ask Mr. Crossley to come forward?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you could come forward, take a seat, and if you could press the microphone button on the microphone in front of you, and then you'll have 3 minutes, Mr. Crossley.
Good evening. My first question really is, why don't the developers get it right at the start instead of this creeping enhancement that seems to be happening? But my principal concern is for the infrastructure incapacity to bear the overload that this development already threatens, even without the addition of the substantial number of homes being added to it by the present application. In particular, Churchgate Street is already suffering the weight of existing traffic, heavy goods vehicles thundering through, as sat-navs frequently direct traffic from the M11 across Harlow Common and through Churchgate Street, rather than the intended A414 Gilden Way route. Also, private traffic regularly uses this route, particularly for going to and returning from work. Add to this the extensive schools traffic morning and afternoon to service the 2 schools in Hodge Cross Road, and the level of inconvenience and disturbance to residents becomes intolerable. When the Gilden Way development comes on stream, residents there will undoubtedly use the Churchgate Street route to access the M11, and this will push current levels of traffic to breaking point. If I could refer you to page 14 of the report, item BE10, a requirement is that it doesn't do harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area. And I would ask, how can it not alter the character and appearance of what is a precious conservation area? It's nonsense to say that it doesn't. And you say that it's a relatively small addition, 144 dwellings, relatively small, please. As residents, we hear rumours of measures being considered by the authorities for limiting access to Churchgate Street, but apparently no agreement has been reached as to what those measures might be, if anything at all. Surely something must be put in place very soon before a substantial part of the Gilden Way development is completed. Otherwise, the situation will become chaotic. Traffic must be directed to the Gilden Way stroke A414 route to the M11 and not through Churchgate Street. So I would urge the Council to bring the urgency of this to the Essex County Council in their negotiations.
Thank you, Mr. Crossley. Could I ask you to wrap up?
So I do urge the Council. Is that the 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Councillor Charles?
This is the new microphone.
These are the new microphones. They work the
Before you
same
start my
as the
time, let me know which button is it?
red one. The red one.
The danger button. Okay.
Yes.
Well, councillors, chair, I am appalled by this planning application, and I am appalled by the conduct of the developers who showed no courtesy to Old Harlow councillors originally when they proposed this amendment to the planning application, and have singly failed to contact me and my colleagues during this process. It's an utter disgrace, and they should be ashamed of themselves, given the controversial nature of this planning application. The original outline planning application, yes, advocates that on the site there could be 1,100 properties, but the subsequent reserved matters application granted 911. Councillors, you should respect the decision made under the reserved application. This application proposes an additional 143 dwellings, over and above what was agreed in the reserved planning application matter. That brings the site total at the moment to 1,054. When you look at the report this evening on this application, and you look at neighbour, amenity and living conditions, it says, and I quote, the proposed development would be taller and more dense in places than the previously approved scheme. That is a disgrace. It is not in keeping with the character of Old Harlow and the developments surrounding this particular plot. I think the green space, the linear park space, would be impacted by the frontages of new flat blocks. Flat blocks are not in keeping with Old Harlow's housing developments that exist. It frankly flies in the face of the character of the conservation area. So I urge councillors to look at the planning policies BE10 as has been articulated by Norman Crossley, which says about the conservation area that if a development impacts in terms of scale, height, form and massing, that must be considered in your deliberations this evening. Equally, planning policy page 7, developments that take into consideration disabled people and people with special needs. I do not believe that the development, the flat blocks and the housings take into consideration the needs of disabled people and those with special needs. Councillors reject this application. It is a disgrace how the developers have behaved themselves over the course of this. And I would urge you to be very cautious, because these developers are going to push and push the boundaries, and this planning committee should stand up to them and show them that they can't behave in such ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Members, questions? No. So we've got the developer. Sorry, Mr. Clark. I do apologise. Jumping the gun. Ms. Clark, again, if you can turn the microphone on, you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Matt Clark of Boyer Planning, acting as agent for the applicants and therefore speaking in support of the application this evening. The application has been prepared in close consultation with officers at Harlow Council, including pre- and post-submission discussions, and therefore we welcome the positive committee report and recommendation for approval. It should be noted that the offer of providing a briefing to members was made at the outset, but was declined. As set out in the report, the application would deliver an uplift of 143 dwellings relative to those currently benefiting from reserve matters approval within the northern part of the Gilden Park development. Importantly, however, at a total of 1,054 homes, this remains comfortably within the limit of 1,100 dwellings set by the Outline Planning Commission. The principle of development is therefore firmly established, and indeed the southern part of the wider development is already well underway, providing much needed housing for Harlow. Whilst the revised scheme proposes slightly increased densities and building heights within certain parts of the site, these have been carefully considered in urban design terms and remain in accordance with the previously established design codes and parameters for the site. Indeed, it has been acknowledged within the officer's report that the layout revisions provide high quality development that would integrate well with its surroundings and represent an improvement over the previously approved scheme. It is noted within the report that the proposals are considered acceptable in respect of all relevant considerations, including landscaping with no additional impacts on trees, residential amenity given the separation provided by the width of the linear park, highway access and parking with adequate parking spaces provided, highways improvements already secured and resulting in no objection for the highway authority. And just picking up briefly on a point made by one of the earlier speakers, and of course it should be noted that approval has been granted for the new junction 7A to the M11 with associated works to the Gilden Way corridor, which will of course alter the context in highway terms surrounding the site. The approach to updating of the planning obligations has already also been agreed in principle, with drafting of Section 106 agreements underway, and will reflect the fact that a number of substantial payments covering this part of the site have already been made, as well as securing additional payments to cover the uplift in dwellings at the prevailing rates. Of the additional dwellings, 43 will be provided as affordable homes, with overall levels of affordable housing across the site as a whole exceeding the 30% contained in the emerging local plan at 32.5%. In summary, therefore, it can be seen that the proposed scheme is acceptable in respect of both the overall principle and the specific detailed considerations, providing a number of benefits, including delivery of additional housing, as supported by the National Planning Policy Framework. It is therefore respectfully requested that the application be approved.
Thank you very much. Now, questions? Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the agent that he said that there was a briefing offered to members when they set this proposal going? When was that made and who to?
Sorry. Mr. Clark, could you just respond to that question from Councillor Davis, please?
Yes, I mean, it was raised in pre-application discussions with officers, and the offer of making that member briefing that was made, but it was deemed to be inappropriate, so it wasn't something that could have been entertained, so that's the nature of the discussion.
Thank you. Anybody else? Question? Yeah. Councillor Howard.
A couple of questions. Is this site in a conservation area? I'm not very clear about this.
No, it isn't. Churchgate is a conservation area that's obviously over the other side of the main roundabout. The reason for it being included in the report is for completeness, because it was a party referred to as part of the original application. The site that we're talking about here is set, if anything, further behind, well, further away from the conservation area than the main consent, because obviously to the south of the red line is now what's being built anyway. So there's in terms of this application, there's a massive disconnect with the conservation area in terms of Churchgate Street.
Okay. Actually, I've got 3 questions.
Go on.
The second one, Councillor Charles raises the issue of disabled access. Has the officer got a response to that?
Well, the application's being done on the same terms as before, and obviously now there's additional dwellings, so prorated, if anything, there'd be a greater variety and greater mix. I don't have specific numbers though.
And then finally, to come back to the question over there about the offer of consultation. The answer was that the officers said it wouldn't be appropriate. Would you like to comment on that?
I'm not sure that I can, insofar as I've been involved I was involved in the reserve matters, but a planning officer was involved in more of the day-to-day running of this scheme, so I couldn't tell you what the precise wording was. I think if I was asked it now, I may have been asked it and I don't remember. If I was, I would probably say, well, in the context of what's been approved already, this is, in my view, quite a small change. Everything that's been assessed, or the majority of issues that people are concerned about, and I appreciate, have already been assessed as part of the outline planning application and those reserve matters. So the vast majority of the content of this application has already been decided. So from that point of view, I can see why it wouldn't be essential. But in truth, I can't give you a 100% accurate answer on that.
Because I'm of the view that officers shouldn't be making that judgment unless there's something which is really overriding. I mean, the Officers Act in 2012 made it clear that the government viewed councillors as being the interface between proposed developments and the officers. So I find it a bit odd that an officer has said that an applicant shouldn't talk to the members, and after all, the members do actually make the decision at the end of the day.
I wouldn't say that, or I would like to think they would never be expressed in those terms of, with the officers don't speak to the councillors at all.
Could I suggest that I think the right thing to do would be to seek a written response to the committee from officers on this point?
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from one of Councillor Hardware's issues over B4, this was the public buildings. We're now in transit, if you like, to a transition between one local plan and the other. I'm just wondering which set of guidelines accessible properties will be built to. Under the new plan, it's going to be pro rata and SHMA requirements, whereas before, I think it's building reg 54.133. I'll just clarify which bit or which rules will apply.
I don't know the specifics of building regs because obviously they're separate. There is an increased onus for, I think they're called M4 Part 2 and 3 dwellings to come through under the new local plan. This has been submitted under the terms of the existing local plan, so it will be, it's essentially whatever the plans are now showing is what they'll be built.
Yeah. Councillor Livings.
Chairman, we've already, they've been asked to increase this by 154 houses. There's still, it's about 50 houses outstanding from the outline planning, and at any moment they could come back to us and ask for those extra houses on there as to what we've already been asked for today. Is that correct?
I think the key point, as you rightly point out, is there is, as granted by the Secretary of State, pre-approval for 1,100 dwellings.
Yeah.
And that is the issue at stake.
But those could come in, another 50 could come with this actual growth on this small piece at the moment before we go into
Well, I hope they wouldn't. But
No,
absolutely.
that is a possibility.
It is. Any other questions? Debate. Councillor Sicker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit puzzled, being that they were told they could build 1,100 houses, and then they start putting applications in for just under 1,000, and then they added another 143. This doesn't make sense. Surely their architects would have known how many houses they could get on that site.
I agree. But clearly they didn't.
No?
Anybody else? Yeah. Councillor Livings.
Well, obviously, I've particularly been an Old Town Council and also on the planning committee here. I'm not happy about this. I won't be voting for these extra houses. The houses will still fall within the amount agreed on the outline planning, which I was actually on at that time. The extra houses that are being proposed will create extra traffic, which this gentleman over there spoke about. We are already in a very bad situation with the traffic in Old Harlow, especially along Gilden Way at the moment. I know that new roads are supposed to be proposed, but at the moment the situation is dire, and I can't actually see with the new road coming in it's going to get any better. Plus the extra density within the area, it's overcrowding the site. I feel we haven't got any other area in Harlow with those amount of houses all crammed in on one another. Flats in Newhall, we've got Newhall, flats in Newhall, but everything has been looked at and laid out in a very, very fine way. I don't agree with what's going on here in any way. And it's contrary to the rest of Old Harlow as a whole. So I, for one, will not be voting for this.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Well, I sympathise over the traffic, and I do understand concerns that there are. One would hope that that's a more temporary measure, but and the whole question of the infrastructure that was put forward by the objector. But nevertheless, we are confronted with a decision that has already been taken. The planning permission has been given to 1,100. There are another 50 odd houses, I know, or dwellings. They could ask for more, but then if they do, then we are confronted with that decision. But it's very difficult to turn down something that the Secretary of State has agreed on or already as an outline planning permission and approval at that stage. That includes the green space argument, but that has all been approved by the Secretary of State officially in a sense, so it's very difficult to argue. I would hope that the developers might concede a little generosity or a little more generosity in terms of the Gibbet Garden, which is obviously got to put up with considerable extra disturbance. And, we could ask gently if we might get the consideration for the Gibbet Garden. But otherwise, I feel that it's very difficult to turn the whole application down in view of the decisions that have already been taken.
Councillor Clark. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. From my memory, we turned this proposal down in the beginning, and then it went to appeal, and we got costs against us. The application tonight is within what they asked for, what the Secretary of State has granted. I'd like to turn it down, but I don't think we can, because if we turn it down, it goes to appeal again, and more costs will be levied against the council. I've got Churchgate Street may be a problem at the moment, but I think the bigger problem is going to be is when they build Junction 7A, because the amount of traffic coming down Gilden Way, I wouldn't want to be living there. But anyway, I don't think we can turn this down for the reasons that I've outlined, and unfortunately that's the case.
I think it's spot on, Councillor Davis. Unfortunately, the whole committee was overturned by the Secretary of State. Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Have a lot of sympathy with the local residents. Having all these extra houses and all the extra traffic areas like this, but as everyone else is saying, the outline decision has been made for 1,100 properties. The application is within the 1,100 properties envelope. I am concerned at the high densities, which has already been said are not in keeping with the general area. But having viewed the plans tonight, it doesn't look as bad as I feared. It's still not good, but it's not as bad as I feared. It's always going to be a sort of a balanced decision. One of the few plus factors for it is the 32.5% affordable housing, which is 0.5% below our current target and 2.5% above our future target. But that is a positive factor. And reluctantly, because we can't turn it down, not to approve it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Case members, if you... I'm sorry. Councillor Edwards.
As I understand it, I mean, effectively, we are held by the previous decision. We're held by the decision in relation to the 1,100 houses. It falls within that. Sort of purview, as it were. With regard to the conservation area, that's obviously an access to the conservation area. That's a matter, it would seem to me, for the county council, and possibly the county council has a responsibility for roads, etc., in terms of directing traffic away from that area. And I would hope that both the district council and possibly the developers could approach the county council to try and do something about that and see that those issues are addressed. I can't see that there's any planning. There's no planning reasons to turn down this application. So I'll be voting in favour.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? No? In that case, members, we would like to move to the vote. All those in favour of recommendations 1 to 15, which appear on pages 22 to 26 of your order paper. And against? That is carried. Anybody against specific?